It's something that people will ask. They'll see the rendering of our communities and they say, I don't know, man, that looks like a cult, which is actually a pretty essential conversation that needs to happen, because they're not talking about how the houses are arranged. What they're talking about are like, how are decisions made? Who's the tiebreaker? Like, what are the penalties for disagreeing with the decision? I mean, that's really what they're asking. And a lot of times they're speaking from a place of experience. I mean, we've had people that are like, I've seen that before. I lived in a cult and I'm not going to ever do that again. And they're not talking about how houses are near each other. They're talking about how decisions are made. Who's the tiebreaker? And what's the penalty for disagreeing with the tiebreaker? That's what they're talking about. And there is actually criteria for defining whether or not a community is a cult. But what's interesting about this is that I don't think there's any such thing as a cult that's ever said, oh yeah, we're a cult. What they actually say is, no, we're not a cult. We are a values-aligned community, a family, if you will. And we usually are aligned to a set of spiritual practices that really transcend anything else. And that's what they say, which, I mean, there's a lot of things that describe themselves that way. That's a real common definition. And the actual criteria for whether or not a group is a cult is it's often a small community that is arranged around a charismatic leader, typically a dude, because that's just how it plays. And then they end up having very rigid social rules around how to protect the tiebreaker, if you will, and how that tiebreaker is treated is different than how others are treated. And then of course one of the taboos is ever suggesting that you're part of a cult. It's kind of how that goes. So when as y'all probably know, my genesis of my journey is that I had left the domain of security and anti-fraud, and I worked as a chief technology officer for a company in Amsterdam, providing tools for refugee populations and governance tools for stateless populations. And we got the award that put the UNESCO award that put Twitter on the map. We received in 2017. So that company went broke, and I took what was left of my engineering team and I built my company, 214 Alpha. And then we have been building tools for basically self-determination for those who want to do community activation here in the States. They tend to be nonprofits or churches or whatever. And anyway, it ends up being a pretty decent schema for what's also known as an intentional community. Now, an intentional community is a very specific nomenclature for people who come together around a shared set of beliefs and values in a way that allows them to really, embrace those values and not allow themselves to be washed away by sort of the mainstream values. It's funny, the nomenclature, intentional. There's a lot of intentionality about how the communities are structured. It's because they've experienced cults, and so the early manifestations, at least in the 20th century, were what were called communes. And the thing is that humans have assembled themselves this way for thousands of years. In fact, it might be our baseline state. But I think that probably the reason that a lot of people don't want that and they want to go into like what we consider sort of the mainstream world is the sort of belief that, wow, I don't want to be part of a cult. I want to be able to have an escape plan. And then I want to be able to live in a community on my terms, which I get that, man. I get it. The issue, of course, is that that's not really working for a growing number of people. So what they end up doing is seeking an alternative, and they end up reverting to a prior pattern. And, a lot of this happened in the 70s, obviously. I saw a lot of this in Oregon. There were a lot of hippies that moved to Oregon to do their intentional living. And it didn't take long before some of them to begin to resemble a Christian cult. So having been raised in these sort of like Christian cults that tend to be assembled around a charismatic male tiebreaker, within sort of this weird culture that doesn't challenge the tiebreaker because they're speaking on behalf of spiritual authority. These people who were raised in these communities were like, I've been there. I'm never doing that again. And so then when they see the little communities we have, they're like, that looks like a cult. And what they're actually talking about isn't how the structures are arranged. They're talking about how decisions are made, and they're talking about who's the tiebreaker, and they're talking about What are the penalties for disagreeing with the tiebreaker? I keep repeating myself on purpose, because the remedy for that is transparency, accountability, and ease of audit. And the reason that is the remedy is that's literally the same schema for mitigating fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption. That's literally what you do. You make it accountable, transparent, and easy to audit, so as to discourage fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption. And you might think that those two frameworks, the cult and the fraud frameworks, are dissimilar. They're actually identical. Within a large company, people think, oh, I'm going to catch a hacker who's in a Chinese bunker. But the person who is actually costing the organization the most money is statistically not the guy in the Chinese bunker. It's actually most likely to be Janice, who's been working there for 38 years, and she's assembled a little empire, and she's justified taking a skim off the top. And it's not just Janice, because it's never just Janice. It's actually a culture that has learned to protect Janice because they get a little bit of benefit as well. And I wouldn't say she's charismatic, but in the context of an organization, there's a little bit of charisma. The people come to believe that she is more loyal to the well-being of others than the organization itself. And you get a little starter yeast of criminality within an organization, and it results into procurement fraud, people skimming off the top. And you end up having a who makes decisions in a way that run counter to the actual corporate direction. Who's the tiebreaker? Often it's Janice. This is what Price Waterhouse and Ernst & Young will show. If you look in the statistics of procurement fraud, man, that's what it is. And then what are the penalties for disagreeing with Janice? Well, I'll tell you what it is. Janice is going to accuse you of fraud. That's what happens. So same thing happens in a cult. It's, someone with external genitalia who is a tiebreaker, and then they end up speaking on behalf of divine authority. And if you disagree, then you're accused of being dark or evil or whatever language. Is the same idea. The remedy: transparency, accountability, ease of audit. That's literally what we built into the schema. I don't keep the data. I don't run advertising. You get the data. Decisions are rendered transparent, accountable, easy to audit. If there are disagreements, it's run through an arbitration system. So all decisions, all tie-breaking decisions, transparent, accountable, easy to audit. That's how you do it. And there's really no other way. And I can assure you there's going to be a lot of people who try to usurp that, because that's how humans are. But to the extent that the community is able to steward those resources appropriately, I think it'll be fine. Of course, I'm a faithful person. I think that things will be fine. And that's all I got to say on the matter.